I'll say this first because I genuinely don't know what the background footage to this video will be. It might be graphics, it might be gameplay, it might be nothing, it might just be a still image, and if that's the case, I'm sorry, I know that's not the most exciting thing in the world. But I did want to get this video up in a timely manner because every time I went to make this video, another trade would happen that was worth talking about and I'd have to delay. But fear not, delay no more, buckle up, this is going to be a long video. Because now the trade deadline has come and gone and it's time to finally talk about some trades. I'll be giving my opinion on what I consider to be the most intriguing deals of the deadline period, not just on the day. But I first want you to consider my perspective on deadline day. Most people at this point consider it to have been disappointing. But most deadline days usually are, and there are two main reasons for that. One, you're always going to have the players that are rumored for big moves that ultimately never move. And two, moves aren't just limited to that day. The week or so leading up to the actual deadline is usually where the big moves happen, and that has pretty much been the case yet again this year. So was it disappointing to hear about Reece Scarlett? No offense, by the way, but was it disappointing to be reading about Reece Scarlett being traded rather than Matt Duchene on March 1st? Of course it was. But at least for me, the intrigue is still there when it comes to those players that weren't moved. What do the Avs eventually do with Duchene and Landeskog? Pittsburgh, they kept Marc-Andre Fleury, as some expected, and they're going into the playoffs with two Stanley Cup winning goalies. They are going for it all, not caring that they will more than likely lose him for nothing over the summer, or maybe they do trade him before the draft. Who knows? Again, we don't know, and that's what's exciting about it. It's extremely interesting. You have Shane Doan staying in Arizona. That's probably more interesting than him leaving. That level of loyalty and commitment to a franchise is mind-boggling when you know they're not going to make the playoffs and your chances for a cup, that window is just so close to being shut. It's insane. But obviously, in general, this deadline was a little bit more different than normal, which makes it surprising to me that we had as many trades as we did, to be honest. First off, the playoff race. When is the last time a playoff race was this tight? So many teams, a handful really at best, can be considered truly out of the playoffs, and it's been that way pretty much all year. And secondly, I think people underestimate how big of an impact the upcoming expansion draft has had on this deadline and will continue to have throughout the offseason. One wrong move by a GM and they risk losing a key piece of their franchise because they can't protect them. So even these minor deals that seem like nothing could have major implications, or on the flip side, as we'll get into with the likes of the Shattenkirk and Bishop deals, even a smaller return than what was expected isn't exactly a bad thing. And I'll say one more thing before we dive into these trades. I'm not going to declare winners and losers of the deadline. Doing that really is, I don't want to say it's lazy because I don't want to take a shot at anybody, but that simply says, hey, this team won on paper, which doesn't mean anything. Sure, improving your odds to win the cup is nice, but at the end of the day, we won't truly know who won trade deadline until it's well beyond March 1st. If Washington wins the cup, sure, they did great on deadline day. They won deadline day. If they lost, you could even say the St. Louis Blues won by selling, and they'd be looking pretty good. Hell, a team like Buffalo or the Islanders could be declared the winner by doing nothing major and allowing others to gamble and potentially losing out. It's too big to properly dissect really until years down the line. That's why minor trades like Chicago and Anaheim, the minor deal that they did, could, you never know, turn out to be a blockbuster. Chicago traded Spencer Abbott and Sam Carrick to Anaheim for defenseman Kenton Helgeson, who spent most of the year in the ECHL, and a 7th round pick in 2019. Knowing Chicago, that 7th rounder will be directly used to draft the reincarnation of Duncan Keith. So you cannot declare somebody the winner of deadline day. But I've digressed long enough. Let's get into the trades about 5 minutes into this. And I wanted to start off with the Mark Streit saga. First off, he is traded to Tampa for Valtteri Filppula, a 2017 4th round pick and a conditional 2017 7th round pick. Tampa then flips him to Pittsburgh for a 4th round pick in 2018. There's also a ton of cap retention, but we'll just push that off to the side. For Philadelphia, now I'm not handing out letter grades for each trade like, oh, this is a B+, but this is a solid piece of business from the Flyers. Rather than losing Mark Streit for free, as this trade seems to suggest that they thought they probably would have, you add a decent center in Filppula, who still has some term on his contract. The interesting thing is that he becomes just the 3rd player on the Flyers with a no-movement clause, along with Claude Giroux and Wayne Simmons. As it is, the Flyers are just 4 points out of the playoff spot, or out of the playoffs in general. They didn't exactly buy, they didn't exactly sell, and they're in one of the better spots that a team can be as we approach the expansion draft in terms of flexibility and what they can do. They're in a very good spot, and I do feel like, again, this was a solid piece of business for the Flyers. For the Penguins, I mean, it's just not fair. It's just not fair. The rich get richer. We'll be talking about them a lot in this video. They get a fourth rounder next year to add a player the caliber of Mark Streit for your playoff push. It's just not fair, and obviously it is a great deal for them. But in saying that, Steve Yzerman and the Bolts just shed cap space and got rid of a no-movement clause. I wasn't going to say who won the deadline, but I can say who I think won each trade. And while there are positives for both Pennsylvania teams, would you put an end on the end of that? I don't know. The Lightning just took a big step in securing their future over this hugely important offseason for them. Philly may make the playoffs. Pittsburgh might win the cup this year, but the light at the end of the tunnel for Tampa just got a whole lot brighter. Great trade for all 3 teams. I give the edge to the Tampa Bay Lightning, though, and much like Pittsburgh, we will be talking about the Lightning throughout this video. Moving on to the second trade, and it is the lone Bruins trade that we have to discuss. Drew Stafford for a conditional 6th round pick. For Winnipeg, it is surprising to see them technically sell, with them only being 5 points out of a playoff spot. But again, rather than probably losing him for free, they at least got something for him, and they do have the forward depth to at least give someone a chance. Stafford, while he had a great year last year, hasn't exactly been a major player this year. For the Bruins, it's not that they just acquired Drew Stafford, who should be a decent enough addition to the 3rd line. But just like I mentioned, a team like Buffalo, sometimes it's the moves that you don't make. And finally, the Bruins avoided making a mistake. They avoided making a desperation move, as they've done so many times in the past few years, and they made a smart, cheap addition. With the Bruins right now, while I don't blame Claude Julien for prior shortcomings, the Bruins have been playing some outstanding hockey under interim head coach Bruce Cassidy, and they could very well make the playoffs right now with who they already have. And making the playoffs, that's good enough for most Bruins fans right now, at least the ones who have realistic expectations. For the Winnipeg Jets, could they have used additional help for that playoff push? Sure. Could the Bruins have used another backup goalie to help avoid the team having to run Tuukka into the ground just so that they can make the postseason? Of course. But neither team made a panic move, as they very well could have. And for that, both teams are winners. There's no doubt about that. Now, I said I'd talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins a little bit more, and here we go. They acquire Frankie Corrado from Toronto in exchange for Eric Fehr, defenseman Steve Oleksy, and a 4th round pick in 2017. If I'm a Leafs fan, I'm happy. I'm ecstatic. Sure, a large part of the fan base wanted to see him succeed. Of course they did. But at the end of the day, they turned a free waiver claim into something. Now, is that something the most exciting thing in the world? Obviously not. Eric Fair, while he does have experience, hasn't been great as of late. Steve Alexi is simply a depth defenseman. But again, it's something. You got something for a player that was not a part of your future plans. It is something. And for Pittsburgh, as if they needed more defensive depth, they have it in spades, which brings me to the Ron Hainsey deal. They acquired him from Carolina for forward Danny Cristo and a second-round pick this year. Another great ad for the Penguins. For the Hurricanes, another draft pick to add to the stockpile. And Danny Cristo was once highly touted. He may just be a career AHLer. But again, the Canes get something for someone who was probably going to walk at the end of the year. Ron Hainsey never played a playoff game in his career. I really don't think you could see him going to Carolina or signing with a team like Carolina in the offseason. Unless he had the plan of getting traded. Like, oh yeah, sure, I'll sign in Carolina for a year, they'll retain some salary, and I'll help out Carolina. Odds of that are pretty slim. He would have tried to have signed with the likes of Pittsburgh anyway, so it works out great for him. Moving back to the Toronto Maple Leafs, because they were not done. The Leafs would add, and by the way, if you hear this chair squeaking, I apologize, but there's nothing I can do about it. This chair sucks. The Leafs would add another veteran presence in Brian Boyle, who fits nicely into the team in that fourth-line center spot that they desperately needed to fill. The likes of Freddie Gauthier not working out. The likes of Byron Frey is not necessarily being given a chance, and he is traded to Tampa along with a 2017 second-round pick. The Leafs are still in a great spot despite giving up that second, and can still end up with, I believe, 3 second-round picks this year. So you factor that in with getting a player of the caliber of Brian Boyle. Solid trade for them. And for Tampa, Steve Yzerman. Oh my God. Again, they clear more cap space. They get a solid player in Byron Fries who may still be able to break into an NHL lineup full-time. Something he wasn't going to do under head coach Mike Babcock. And Tampa adds a second-round pick. Good business for Toronto. More great business for the Lightning. No doubt about that. I'll quickly mention the Michael Stone trade, although it happened a while ago. Arizona and Calgary, two teams that had a fairly decent deadline for themselves, and this move is really no different. Calgary picks up Stone, who, even if he turns into a rental, should help solidify their back six. And Arizona picks up a third-round pick this year and a conditional fifth next year. Not bad for someone who they might have lost for free. And speaking of Calgary, they weren't done. Curtis Lazar and Mike Koska off to the Flames for Jyrki Jokipaka and a second-round pick this year for Calgary. If Curtis Lazar can find his game and become the player people thought he would be, this isn't a bad bit of business at all. You have Curtis Lazar stating that he had mono for a decent part of this year. Crazy, just crazy situation with him moving on from the Sens. And for the Flames, though, before moving on to talk about Ottawa, for the Flames, if you make the playoffs, it makes giving up that second-round pick this year a little bit more palatable. For the Sens, obviously it's a risk giving up Curtis Lazar, but it's clearly something that was bound to happen. You could see just how sour that relationship was. You do get a slight improvement to your team defensively, Jokipaka over Koska, and that second-round pick could come in handy, especially due to some of the other moves that they made, which, let's get into those. The Victor Stahlberg trade, the Sens acquire him from Carolina for a third-round pick this year. Stahlberg hasn't been terrible for the Canes, so this could be a solid addition for Ottawa. And for Carolina, who have probably fallen out of the playoff race at this point, getting another third-round pick cannot hurt as they continue to add pieces. A good trade for both. But then, and you guys knew this was coming, then the Ottawa Senators acquire Alex Burrows from the Vancouver Canucks for prospect Jonathan Dahlen, who was the 42nd overall pick in this year's draft. Sound the alarm, Jim Benning not only sold at the deadline, but absolutely fleeced the Ottawa Senators, who then went on to extend Alex Burrows' contract. Easy for me to say, stumbling over everything. They gave Burrows 2 more years, is what I am trying to say. I hate this chair. I hope that doesn't pick up on the mic too much. I don't have hard feelings for Sens fans. Like, I got nothing against the Ottawa Senators or, the fans, the team, really. I mean, aside from them killing the Bruins' playoffs hopes last year, I just feel bad, man. I mean, will this trade work out? It could. Maybe Craig Anderson continues to play at the high level he's playing at, and he leads this team to a cup, and Burrows gets his ring, but the odds of that happening are pretty damn slim. I don't get it. And for the Canucks, I mean, Jesus, good for you guys. This is a marvelous piece of business, and I'm happy for Canucks fans. I never had anything against them, really. I feel bad. I mean, people take shots at how the Bruins have declined, but then all I have to do is look at the Vancouver Canucks to feel a little bit better about myself, which, again, not a shot at you guys. I like the Canucks. I grew up liking the Canucks. Marcus Naslund was one of my favorite players, but, man, that is rough. But the Canucks do seem to be moving in the right direction. That is my point, as this trade proves, as does this next one. A really interesting deal. The Sharks trade for Jannik Hansen. They give up Nikolai Goldobin and a conditional 4th-round pick this year that becomes a 1st-rounder if the Sharks win the Cup. Now, San Jose adds perhaps an underrated piece with Jannik Hansen, who knows, he could be the missing piece to that team. And if they were to win the Cup and that 4th-rounder becomes a 1st, it doesn't matter. A 1st-round pick, a strong prospect in Goldobin, nothing matters if they win the Cup. You do whatever you can to win the Cup. You trade Sidney Crosby and your firstborn child to win the Cup. It doesn't matter what you give up as long as you win. For Vancouver, Jim Benning. Round of applause for Jim Benning. 2 fantastic trades, acquiring 2 very strong prospects. Well done. Speaking, though, of fantastic trades, I think this might be the steal of the deadline. P.A. Parenteau to Nashville for a 6th-round pick. The Devils give him up for nothing. Granted, they got him for nothing, I believe. Legitimately nothing. I'm pretty sure it was waivers and not a trade where they got him from the New York Islanders. A steal for Nashville, period. An absolute steal. Crazy. Crazy. Moving on, though, Jarome McGinley to the LA Kings for a conditional 4th-rounder in 2018. Who isn't happy for Iggy? I understand if you're a Sharks fan or a Ducks fan, but if you're not rooting for the Kings this postseason, you don't have a soul. Props to the Avs for getting a deal done and giving this legend a chance to win a cup. And yes, I will be rooting for the LA Kings out of the West. Back in the East, another legend that has a chance to win another cup, Jaromir Jagr, sees his team improve as the Florida Panthers pick up Thomas Vanek. I was going to say from Detroit for Dylan McIlrath and a conditional 3rd-round pick this year. A good sell from the Red Wings. They weren't likely to resign Vanek, who at this rate might be getting paid, although the stats, the advanced stats and his defensive numbers, but you don't pay him for defense. Dylan McIlrath still has a chance to be a regular NHLer. So overall, a good move for Detroit. For Florida, it is a strong buy after their recent surge of success. They're only 1 point out of the wild card at the time that I'm recording this, and if Vanek can keep up those offensive contributions, the Panthers should be able to salvage this season. Again, a smart trade for both teams. We will stick with Detroit for a decent amount of time here. They pick up a 3rd-round pick this year and a 2nd next year from the Rangers for defenseman Brendan Smith. Obviously a great haul for these soon-to-be rebuilding Wings if you don't already consider them in that spot. And it is a decent ad for the Rangers. Smith isn't the biggest offensive contributor, but for a third-pairing shut-him-down defender, not too many teams in the league would pass on him. So it's perhaps a little bit risky with how much they gave up for him, but it could pay off for the Rangers, no doubt about that. I'll mention this here too. Decent business from Detroit as they, and this trade happened a while ago, but the Thomas Yurko deal. He gets a fresh start in Chicago. The Wings pick up a third-round pick this year. Good stuff for both. Sticking with Chicago, Johnny Oduya is back. He is with the Blackhawks because, of course, he is traded from Dallas for prospect Mark McNeil and a conditional fourth in 2018. A great ad for the Hawks because, of course, they pulled that off. And for Dallas, you get a prospect who is in desperate need of a fresh start, and it could work out for them, especially, too, when you've already traded somebody like Patrick Eaves. That might work out, and he might get in to the Stars lineup, so that could pay off, no doubt about that. Speaking of Patrick Eaves, though, I mean, we might as well talk about it now. Traded to Anaheim for a conditional second-round pick. An interesting buy for the Ducks, but not the worst trade, hardly the worst trade of the deadline. Not a bit of bad business for the Stars either, who are 7 points out of a playoff spot at the time of recording this, and it's tough to say whether trading someone like Patrick Eaves was going to make or break their playoff hopes. With all of that said, 21 minutes into this, we get to the big trades, the big-time trades. Let's do this. First up, Arizona sends Martin Hanzal, Ryan White, and a 2017 fourth-round pick to the Minnesota Wild for prospect Grayson Downing, a 2017 first, a 2018 second, and a conditional fourth in 2019 that could become a third or a second. A lot of different conditions on this. For Arizona, would you have held on to Martin Hanzal? Probably not. He was probably going to leave through free agency, so that instantly makes this a win for them. For Minnesota, you give the clear message of we are absolutely going for the cup, as they should. This could be their year. And both players, in fairness, are solid additions. Ryan White should be a great fit on that fourth line. And Martin Hanzal, while he's faced some criticism for, not being the greatest first-line player or being called a third-line center, he is a very solid addition for the Wild. And again, if they win the cup, who cares how much they gave up for him? They won. Look at, say, for example, this is often thrown out there, the Chicago deal for Antoine Vermette not too long ago. On paper, that's a horrific deal for the Blackhawks, but they won the cup, so nobody cares. So the Hanzal deal, I'm good for it, man. I'm happy if I am a fan of either team. Although if I'm a fan of the Coyotes, whether or not Martin Hanzal is on my team is not my biggest concern. It's whether or not I have a team moving forward, which, sorry to bring that up if there are any Yotes fans watching this. I do apologize. Tampa Bay. Have we talked about the Lightning enough? No, we haven't. They trade Ben Bishop in a fifth-round pick this year to the LA Kings for Peter Budaj, prospect Eric Cernak, and a seventh-round pick this year, and another conditional pick this year as well. For Tampa, how much have I praised them already, but Steve Yzerman, god damn, you got something for Ben Bishop. You win. Even if it was just the picks, you got something. And better than that, you get an NHL-ready backup to help out Andrei Vasilevsky as he transitions to be the starter. And you get a very, very strong prospect in Cernak, which, what an amazing deal. What an amazing deal. If you're not jealous, like I know some of the things that Chicago have pulled off and some of the things that Pittsburgh have done as far as cap management and circumvention, basically. Very few teams, very few fan bases should... Pretty much everyone should be jealous that Tampa has Steve Yzerman as their GM, is what I'm trying to say. Very few teams can be like, yeah, he's good, but I think I'd rather have my GM. Unreal for him. For the LA Kings, obviously the timing is questionable. If this happened when Jonathan Quick just went down at the start of the year, nobody bats an eye. This is an amazing trade at that time. But the trade finally happens just as Quick returns from injury. And it's weird, too, because all the teams that you'd think he might go to, particularly the Dallas Stars. But no, he goes to the LA Kings just as Quick comes back from injury. And to me, that says two things. Number one, despite Peter Budaj's resurgence, they didn't want him to be the backup in case of injury to Quick. They wanted a bigger, better insurance policy. Literally a bigger insurance policy. And two, either Jonathan Quick isn't fully healthy, or if he is, they believe that it might not stay that way for long. And Ben Bishop is one hell of an insurance policy. Is it a bit rough to give up a prospect like Cernak? Yes, it is. But again, if you win, who cares? Or if Jonathan Quick goes down again during the playoffs, before the playoffs, if Ben Bishop gets them into the latter rounds of the playoffs, hell, if Ben Bishop leads them to a cup, this looks like one of the best trades in NHL history. It is a win for both teams. Yes, the timing is a bit weird, but the positives definitely outweigh the negatives for both sides. Kevin Shattenkirk and Phoenix Copley to the Washington Capitals for Zach Sanford, Brad Malone, a 2017 first, and a conditional second-round pick in 2019. For the Blues, again, I've said this for a few other teams, it's something. You got something. You lost Brouwer for nothing. You lost David Backes for nothing. At least you got something for Kevin Shattenkirk. That said, something turns out to be pretty decent. Sanford is a promising prospect. Brad Malone, he might not be around for too long, but he is a decent enough depth player. We're deep into this, and it's been a while since I messed up. I'm surprised. And the Blues get 2 picks, even if they are more likely to be lower picks, because of course they are coming from the Washington Capitals. Solid stuff for the Blues. Does it hurt their playoff chances a little bit? Yes, but you had to do it. You had to. For the Caps, I mean, come on. It's not every day that you add a player like Kevin Shattenkirk. It's not every day that you add a player like Kevin Shattenkirk when you're already battling for the President's Trophy. But for them, of course, the pressure is on. Shattenkirk's a rental. Nobody's denying that. Likely to sign with the Rangers, who are the favorites. The Bruins have been thrown out there. Or whoever else can really splash the cash. I mean, if he gets a major deal from a team that can afford him, who says he doesn't go to the likes of a Carolina or maybe even an Arizona? It's the understatement of the century. It is a win-now situation for the Caps. They have to win now. And tough to say if they won this trade or not yet, but obviously it massively increased their chances and odds of finally getting over the hump and winning the Stanley Cup. So, as we are 28 minutes into this, it's all been one take, by the way. I don't know if you noticed that. There have been some pauses in there. But I am long-winded. I am long-winded. You may have noticed, though. You may have noticed that chair creaking. You may have noticed, aside from that, that there's one team I've failed to mention. One team that's made a staggering 5 trades. Even more if you go back further and include the Nesterov deal. Let's talk about Montreal. And if it wasn't clear that Claude Julien is back in the saddle, these deals were the nice slap to the head that made you realize it. As the Habs shift to being a more typical Julien team, tough and defensively responsible. First up, Greg Pateryn and a 4th-round pick this year to the Dallas Stars for Jordie Benn. I'm a little bit surprised. Now, the rumblings were out there that Pateryn would be moved, but statistically, he is far from terrible, and honestly, I'm not sure how much of an improvement Jordie Benn is over him, if at all. I genuinely don't know if Jordie Benn's an improvement over him. I guess the main concern would be whether or not Pateryn would resign. Benn still has some term left on his contract. I genuinely don't know. Point production-wise, they're dead even. So I guess as you can tell by my tone, I feel like this is a very solid trade for Dallas. For Montreal, time will tell. I mean, Jordy Benn, it's not like he's a terrible player, but I don't see why they made this move. I genuinely don't. Next up, you have David Desharnais to Edmonton for Brandon Davidson. Admittingly, I don't have too much to say about this deal. For the Oilers, on paper, it allows them to put Leon Draisaitl on the top line with Connor McDavid full-time, so that's a gigantic win for them. Although, you talk about Edmonton and what the team does when McDavid's not on the ice. So, I guess it is helpful to have Desharnais there, but McDavid's going to put up points regardless. So, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what they can do. But that's, I mean, if you do have Draisaitl with McDavid, that is a gigantic win. Davidson isn't a terrible defender, but there is an argument that one would rather have Greg Pateryn over Brandon Davidson. So again, time will tell. But for now, Edmonton, even with their defensive struggles, win this trade. They absolutely win this trade on paper. Up next, you have Steve Ott for a 6th-round pick in 2018. For Detroit, it's another pick, and you make room for a younger player. So good stuff from them. For Montreal, you get what you want, and you get it for cheap. The typical Julian-style player, and I saw a lot of people ragging on this trade, but this is now the 3rd trade we've talked about for Montreal, and I personally say it's the only one where Montreal doesn't look like the loser on paper. So I don't know. Maybe that's just my bias in the way I view things. I don't know. Next up, you have Dwight King. This fucking chair. Dwight King for a conditional 4th in 2018. Another cheap pickup. The team definitely gets tougher. But really, it's interesting to see them go for the sandpaper and grit approach. Especially when, not too long ago, they embarrassed the Bruins in the playoffs by using the speed approach to counteract the very strategy that they're building towards right now. I don't know. I don't know. Montreal is an enigma in more than one way. But the trade itself, not bad, especially if Dwight King is used in more of a 4th-line role rather than a 3rd. And we get to the last trade. Sven Andrighetto to Colorado for Andreas Martinson. Call me biased. I don't understand this trade. You see what Montreal is trying to do with these trades, and I get the type of player that Sven Andrighetto is. He's not terrible defensively, but he's not a defensive first player. Regardless, for me, there is no defense for this trade. Colorado wins this by a landslide, no questions asked. I'd almost be willing to call it a steal. Great pickup for the Avs. So overall, it's safe to say that Steve Yzerman's a genius. Detroit's in a solid spot as they start to sell. The moves from Calgary and Vancouver can't be undersold. A fine bit of business from them. You can't undersell the additions from cup favorites like Chicago, Washington, and Pittsburgh either. And honestly, maybe it's just my bias, but I thought the Bruins had a great day by not doing anything drastic. Same could go for Buffalo and the Islanders, both of whom could have bought or sold, but they stood pat for one reason or another. And I might be in the minority, but I found this year's trade deadline to be extremely exciting and eventful. If you couldn't tell that, nearly 34 minutes into this video. Maybe I'm just blinded by the excitement from the upcoming expansion draft. Am I simply too eager to see how those dominoes fall? I don't know, but genuinely, I think each trade, no matter how minor on paper, has major importance in its own unique way. Except for maybe the Reece Scarlett trade. I have nothing against Reece Scarlett, I don't know. If you've made it this far, you are an absolute legend, and I cannot thank you enough. But truly, I want to hear from you guys now. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of this year's deadline, who you thought won in general, who you thought won each trade, your thoughts on each trade, the bad, the good, the indifferent, who won each individual trade. How'd your team do What do you wish your team did differently, if anything? All of it. I genuinely want to know, and I'm eager to see some of the debates down in the comments below. That is it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Again, it means the world to me at this point. It really does. It's crazy. As always, the support, the support's been just incredible. And I hope that continues. So if you would, on your way out, support the video, support the channel by any way you deem necessary. I'm going to go find an oxygen tank so I can breathe because I am just toast. My lungs are on fire. I will talk to you guys again very soon.